It is my job then to speak to you and introduce your themes for today, right? Okay, so is everybody here? I mean, I can't see you all, I can only see four of you.
All of us are here, yes. Most of us at least. So you may begin. Thank you.
Okay, right. Well, it's very great honor as usual to be asked to participate in this. I've been doing it for 7 years, so I feel part of this great institution. And thank you very much for having me on board today. Let's start with human rights, okay, which is the second in the list, but I think it's the one we should start with. Human rights, okay, there's many of them. The right to equality, the right to freedom without discrimination, the right to liberty, to personal security, to an adequate living standard, to freedom of opinion and information, and of course, the right to freedom from state interference. All of these are rights. According to the United Nations, these are rights inherent to all human beings, regardless of race, sex, nationality, ethnicity, language, religion, or any other status. So in theory, everyone everywhere is entitled to these rights, without exception. In theory. What I hear you say, do these have to do with the coronavirus pandemic? Well, quite a lot, actually. The Council of Europe tells us the virus is destroying many lives and much else of what is very dear to us. We should not let it destroy our core values and free societies. The measures taken to combat the spread of the pandemic must not undermine our genuine long-term interest in safeguarding our founding values of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. But, sad to say, in reality, a series of lockdowns combined with fragile social systems have made what was already a very difficult task an even greater challenge. As you all probably know, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was proclaimed by the United Nations General Assembly in Paris in 1948. Now that may seem to you, because you're all very young, a long time ago. Is it 100 years ago? No. 1948. So, for less than 100 years, for quite a long time less than 100 years, we've had human rights suddenly on the agenda. Before that, did they exist? Did we have human rights? Well, if we did, then they were probably only granted to the male sex in most cases. So human rights is a modern thing, okay? Relatively modern anyway. And even from 1948 onwards, how much of the discussion on human rights was actually about human rights for all humans, as opposed to human rights just for men? I don't think women got much of a say in human rights from 1948 until 1970. From 1970 onwards, somewhere around there, I'm being random, we started to have some interest in that. And of course, if you were LGBTQ, or whatever it was in those days, you didn't have any rights at all. Now things have changed, but it does look like we're coming under attack. Ironically, we had the Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, which was following the humanitarian catastrophe that was the Second World War. But it's ironic now because the lockdowns have brought with them the largest police and military presence in many countries since that war, including the deployment of National Guards and paramilitary forces in some countries. In most countries, it's the police who've been given the task of enforcing lockdowns. but with often vague provisions and curfews. And in most cases, the police have not been provided with adequate resources or training to do this work appropriately. The result has been incidents of excessive use of force and violence, reported all over the world, from Wuhan in China to Washington in the USA, to Paris, France, and to Athens, Greece. In some countries, exposure to coronavirus has also been criminalized. Do you represent one of those countries? Do you know that in one of these countries, some of these countries, perhaps the one you're representing, coronavirus has been criminalized? What does that mean? It means it's a crime. In March 2020, 2 cases of attempted murder were opened in South Africa against people who had tested positive for COVID-19 and had not remained in quarantine. This begs the question, does exercising your right to freedom and liberty make you a potential murderer? In response to the crisis, numerous states appear to have forgotten their human rights treaty commitments. Critics of the government, migrants, minority groups have seen their human rights all but disappear. What's worse, minority groups are often blamed for the virus. For example, Muslims in India, people of Asian descent in the USA, Africans in Southeast China. There's also the question of freedom of the press, which is a very important one, of course. Coronavirus-related censorship is rising in many countries, with new laws penalizing anyone who questions the state version of the truth. Exercising your right to express your opinion, you can be allegedly guilty of spreading fake news. There have been crackdowns on social media, total shutdowns of the internet, and in some parts of the world, it is actually prohibited to use the word coronavirus. In one Balkan state, a coronavirus law has been passed by Parliament, no less, giving the Prime Minister unchecked powers to suspend laws and rule by decree, raising the spectre of past dictatorships. Yet, according to a declaration of the Committee of Ministers, free and pluralist public debate is an essential condition for democracy. What's more, the success of any efforts to contain the spread of this virus clearly depends on access to accurate and reliable information, so that informed decisions can be made, rumors can be dispelled, disinformation can be discredited, and measures can be taken to address the crisis. But in much of the world, this essential free flow of information is being obstructed. To be frank, there appears to have been no single acceptable response to these issues anywhere in the known world. Even in the most stable democracies, there is much dissent. People remain confused and divided. Do I have the right to refuse to wear a mask at work? Do I have the right to refuse to serve anyone not wearing a mask? Do I have the right to refuse to serve someone actually wearing a mask? If I am a pregnant woman, do I have the right to remain unvaccinated? If I am anyone, do I have the right to remain unvaccinated? 27% of the Greek adult population, according to figures published yesterday, 27% of the Greek adult population have decided they have the right not to be vaccinated. Do I still have the right to work? to earn my livelihood, to get an education, to worship in a traditional venue, for example, a church or a mosque? Do I have the right to express my concerns or doubts, or do I have a duty to remain silent, despite what I may know or believe? There's so much to debate here, and you don't have a lot of time for it, so I won't take up any more of it. Transparency is a key term. So is trust. I suggest you focus on those two terms, transparency and trust. And also, how much freedom of expression is truly desirable? To what extent should our human rights be upheld during a pandemic? Lots of questions there, lots of things for you to think about. Now, as to our other theme, violence and sexual abuse in work environments, I'm a linguist. I work for the University of Cambridge. I'd like you to consider for a moment the term sexual abuse. I was following your English earlier. You're very good, all of you. Really good. Congratulations. Sexual abuse. What do we mean by this exactly? It's always important to clarify the terminology. Perhaps it's best to start with something that isn't sexual abuse. Sexual harassment. Sexual harassment includes unwelcome sexual advances and discrimination based on your gender or your sexual orientation. It comes in two forms: quid pro quo and hostile work environment. So what's the difference between these things? Quid pro quo, sexual harassment, involves exchanging sexual favors for a benefit. For example, better pay or a promotion, or exchanging it for a threat, for instance, losing your job. Have sex with me and your job or job prospects will be safe. It's very much a case of the director, the actress, and the casting couch. You might like to Google Harvey Weinstein and Me Too if you want to know more about this. I don't have time to go into it now. Harvey Weinstein and Me Too. Google them and you'll find out about it. The other form of sexual harassment is termed hostile work environment. Now, this is a repeated action or actions that upsets the harassed so much that it affects their performance at work. It can include unwelcome sexual advances, flirtation, groping. That means touching another person's body for sexual pleasure. Donald Trump was accused of multiple incidents of groping during his tenure. Sexual innuendo, sending inappropriate or pornographic messages or pictures. And please note, the victim doesn't have to be the actual person who's being harassed. It could be anyone affected by the offensive conduct. Another form of hostile work environment sexual harassment is if your employer provides less favorable conditions of employment to you than to your different sex co-workers, simply because of your gender. This can include hiring, hours, wages, promotions, work schedules and assignments, job evaluation, taking away job responsibilities or privileges, excluding you from meetings, and ultimately it can mean being fired. Physical and emotional responses to harassment can include loss of appetite, being unable to sleep, losing or gaining weight, depression, fear, all or any of which can affect your mental and physical health. And mental and physical health are basic human rights. Both kinds of sexual harassment can be traumatic, and they're serious offences. But they generally fall under civil law. This is very important. They're civil law cases. The next term, sexual assault, is a criminal act. In other words, it's both traumatic and a very serious crime. It's often used interchangeably with the more disturbing term, rape. But sexual assault also includes any non-consensual physical contact, groping, kissing, forcing the victim to touch a body part. Non-consensual means consent to this contact was not given. The victim could be under the influence of alcohol or drugs. He could be underage. She could be unconscious. They could be simply distressed. And by the way, being married or being in an established relationship, for example, boyfriend, girlfriend, does not automatically grant consent to sexual acts. And sexual assault, as with sexual harassment, can happen to and be committed by both men and women, and by extension to those who are transgender. Which brings us to our term, sexual abuse. Sexual abuse is a subsection of sexual assault. It's criminal. It means non-consensual, sexually motivated acts, often intended to cause pain or discomfort to the victim. And it also includes sexual acts between an adult and a child. And depending on where you live, a child could mean a person younger than 16 or a person younger than 18. Sexual abuse, then, is a specific term. And if you're going to debate this as such, then you have to stay within its margins. However, you may wish to widen your scope and include harassment, because harassment certainly can be construed as violence, especially in its psychological form. But do be aware of the differences. Key points to discuss could be whether employers should be required by law to provide sexual harassment training. Is it enough for an employer to have policies and procedures in place for this, or should they be required to monitor and enforce these rules? You may wish to focus on the term accountability. So, as always, it's been a pleasure to participate in this wonderful institution. I hope you have a truly invigorating debate today. And hopefully we'll be back to a physical meeting next year. We're all hoping for that to happen. But if not, never mind. We have these lovely ways through technology so that we don't have to give up. So it's back to you. I understand you might want to ask me some questions.
Thank you so much for your presentation. So delegates, if any of you have questions, please raise your hands now and ask them. Yes, Delegate of India.
Thank you. I didn't understand the difference between sexual assault and sexual abuse, and how it has to do with psychological violence.
Well, psychological violence, first of all, is what we said, it's how it makes you feel if you are sexually harassed or sexually abused. in many ways, it's the psychological pressure that's on you that makes you lose weight, feel sick, not want to go into work, and so on. Okay, that's the psychological pressure that it puts on you. The difference between sexual abuse and sexual assault is more direct. It has to involve a sexual act, whereas sexual abuse can include being against you in terms of your gender. Okay.
Thank you.
Delegate of Austria.
So you mentioned human rights about anti-vaxxers and so on, but don't some people have obligations to? Not everything is concerned with rights, because human health is an obligation to protect our co-citizens.
Constitutions. Yes, it is. That's why I said, I mean, do we have the right? Do we have the right to say no? In this case, you know, this is the big question, isn't it? Anti-vaxxers go on to social media and into the streets and say, look, it's our right to say no. We don't want to have this put in us. But on the other hand, they go around and they present a health hazard to other people. It's a good quantum debate. It's, you know, since 1948, when the United Nations got it together to put this human rights thing on the agenda, we haven't had a pandemic. This is the first one. Yeah, so this is the first major world pandemic since then. And so we just don't have the experience of what to do about it. You must all have seen the pictures of the pandemic of 1916, I think it was, with the Spanish flu. The pictures we have are of basically massed police forces with huge truncheons and bats walking around hitting people who didn't stay at home. Of course, we've moved on from that in most countries, but no, we don't have the experience. This is something new. This is something we have to debate across the world and decide on.
Okay, thank you. Due to time constraints, we will only take one more question. So, Delegate of Morocco.
Thank you. Is coercion also considered sexual harassment or abuse?
It has to be based on two things. It has to be based on either a sexual act or the discussion of this, or it has to be based on your sex, your gender, right? So if coercion is being used based on either your gender and the difference of that, or based on sexual favors, then yes, it is. If it's not, if it's on something else, no.
Thank you.
Right? I'll leave you, but my main point with this was, do be aware of the difference between what is civil and what is criminal. All right, because that's how laws systems work, you know. And both, I mean, all of these are unpleasant and serious offences, but only some of them are crimes. Okay. All right. Well, good luck with your debate then.
Thank you so much. You gave us a wonderful speech and we really appreciate it. Thank you also for answering the questions, and we will try to use those information you gave us during debate.
Please do. I hope that you get somewhere with it. But don't forget, this is something that's happening all over.
Thank you for your contribution and your time.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
It's great to see that young people are doing this. Go on and find an answer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.